Okay, now we're entering part 2 of this look at Tomb 100 and its connection to the Proto Egyptians before pre-dynastic Egyptians. Back in the Nakada periods, before even pre-dynastic Egypt is really looked at as being Dynasty 0 and so on, and then leading into the Narmer palettes and stuff. So this predates it by 300 or 400 years here. What we're looking at, we're a little bit lower here, but I centered it on this picture to begin with. So I'm slowly going to go down here. And we were talking about all the ships that they have and how people might portray ships, and that the Orion the Hunter symbolization here that you see, and of course that's the smiting pose that's there, and that the long-haired current population of Egypt is being attacked by apparently the short-haired Sumerians, and all done by boats, that we're looking at things on terms of livestock and so on, and that all the animals that are there, and how animals make up the pantheons of both. And you definitely see it, and quite often you do see a falcon god holding a pine cone out in Egyptian art and stuff, and it's meant to mean like an Enlil or a god of the air, and in here it does the exact same symbology. So the narrative that's in there, in an article published in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology back in 1962, the authors Humphrey Case and Joan Crowfoot Payne claimed that the most writers had seen an element of narrative, of storytelling in the painting, but that have exaggerated the role of warfare in the painting. And I suggest to you that it's not just an element of the narrative of the painting and that there's hunting and so on, but that it's all narrative and it's all about warfare. That it's a hunting scene like you see in later Egyptian art where they have the whole thing kind of laid out. The Heirokonopolis mural is not just a collection of unrelated themes and motifs. It is a complex and cohesive narrative. It's a story of high drama and subtle nuances with some surprising twists in the plot, and it even has a bit of humor, where before the Heirokonopolis painting seemed so confusing, now with the context of the Sumerian waterborne invasion, it seems to make much more perfect sense. And so this is that narrative that we're seeing here, and it's part of the wall. There were more murals around on the wall in pieces, but pretty much destroyed. This is what they were able to save out of all of it. Now this narrative begins with a Sumerian attack. They arrive in a flotilla of ships, seemingly from out of nowhere, just like their societies seem to pop up out of nowhere, but in reality it's not from nowhere in Egypt, and it's also not from nowhere in Sumeria. This is a surprise attack, though, that's here, like the one shown in the Gebel Arak knife, and the idea shown even again in the Narmer palettes. The Sumerians beached their boats on the shore. They quickly disembarked from the boats and fan out across the countryside, wreaking havoc on the Egyptians and stealing their livestock and taking over. The attack is shown as starting out here somewhat, with the lower right corner is completely damaged except for a single Sumerian attacker. There would have been others, which are now missing due to damage. Presumably some Egyptians were facing the Sumerians and fending off the attack, but we'll never really know. The remaining narrative starts in the upper right-hand corner and moves counterclockwise around the mural. And so you see here a Sumerian lassoes a donkey or a horse-looking creature, but then again it looks like that it has horns. You can see the whitish type looks that go up here, so this could be some type of antelope. The Sumerians will capture as many animals as they can, and this kind of tribal raid on livestock, it had happened all along the Nile for thousands of years, and yet here we see something that looks more like a horse, and a horse here too, which is somewhat strange. After the Sumerians capture as many animals as they can, they run off the rest. In this case, it is a herd of ibexes. The Sumerians is shouting and waving his hands, "Yah, yah," and the people, like they always do when they want to scare away animals. As in livestock raid, the herds are scattered to deny them to the villagers also. Also, the Egyptians will go chasing after their scattered herds instead of chasing after the Sumerians, giving the invaders enough time to load up their stolen livestock and escape in their boats, perhaps. But there comes a point in time where they no longer escape in their boats and go back into the wadi areas, but they just occupy it full outright as two separate people and a third that's been in the delta, and then it becomes a mending of what we know as Egyptian dynasties. This picture indicates the Sumerians came to Egypt as cattle raiders and not as conquerors. They would not run off the livestock if they needed to settle in the region, perhaps, at this point. Now, this ambush, of course, if you run them off, they'll come back, and if you keep a group local, they'll come back to it and pretty much be accessible, if you will. Here's pictures of the ambush that's here. The scene looks as if they're 3 Sumerians in long white skirts are waving their arms to scare off another herd of ibexes, but it isn't really what's totally happening here. The animals are already running off far into the distance, as you see in the background that's there. They're long gone, so the Sumerians aren't interested in the animals anymore. They're focused on what's happening right in their midst. And what they have here is somebody that's caught in their dojo. So this is probably the leader of the area of Sumeria's Nekadaii area that happened when this time is happening. The animals are already running off in the distance and they're tearing off. So notice the man beneath the awning or canopy that you see there. It looks as if he is sitting in the wheelhouse on top of the cabin. However, there are several problems with this assumption, and I said the same thing. Look, it looks like he's up on top of the cabin. But that's not necessarily true. Also, these loops that are here, and you see these lines, these are the oars that are put through these loop lines that are here. So none of the other boats have a wheelhouse, and there is no such thing as a wheelhouse there. It's not steered in that way, so why would you have a wheelhouse? He's an Egyptian on a Sumerian boat. The man is seriously, so that wouldn't be right. The man is seriously out of scale with the big red helmsman in the back of the boat. Not that the artists back then were really concerned or fantastic about the subtleties of perspective, but the man is sitting on top of the oars and stuff that are up there, and that's not really there. I suggest where the oars are inserted through the double loops on top of the cabins for storage during the attack. I've always wondered about these double loops as seen on many Egyptian ships. 4 of the ships in the painting have their oars stowed like this, so this shows you that connection. The man under the awning is actually on land in the background behind the ship, a little bit in the distance there with the people holding their arms out. He's sitting in a royal pavilion, and indeed this is what it looks like in the ancient first royal pavilions that they had, and you can see the king here. King Narmer here sits on the throne in a royal pavilion at a later date, detailed from his ceremonial mace head. You can look at the entire drawing, but at the end again, here we have the same crescent moons, the same people, and this is what we were looking at before, and how the bird comes over. There's a lot of connections that are showing here, and the fish, and the birds. So this can be misconstrued as being that he's close, but it looks like he's not. He's obviously a very important man, and he's in the distance. He sits in the pavilion beneath a white plumed standard that comes up here that's black and white tipped, much like ostrich feathers or perhaps feathers of a falcon. He is drawn much larger than the man standing in front of him, symbolizing his greater importance. He's an Egyptian lord, and the Sumerians have surrounded him. Now, so we look at that now as being the captured lord. That is why the Sumerians have their arms outstretched. They are surrounding him, closing in on him, and preventing his escape. The Sumerian stands before the Egyptian lord. This is the moment when the lord is captured. He bends his knees and bows in submission. And that's what's shown here, that he's bent down and raising out his hands. It could be something different, though, too. If this was the Sumerians deciding to stake claim, this could be them put into his awning and him doing a praying and everyone else keeping everyone at bay. And this is the idea that there were many guards around, and really it's just showing 3 people with arms out. I'm going with his idea because of the difference drawn in the depictions, too, even though it's drawn from the people of that area. Clearly, this is not Lord Heirokon. He would not forever immortalize his ignominious capture by depicting it on his own burial tomb for all eternity. This is a neighboring Egyptian lord, perhaps a friend of Lord Hyrokon, perhaps an enemy of Lord Hyrokon. We don't know which side that the guy that's being buried here is actually on in this situation, because they become one and the same. The battle is not going well for those Egyptians, though, and it's about to get worse. The Egyptians are surprised and overwhelmed, and like on the Gebel Arak knife, meanwhile, we keep looking for some sign of the inevitable Egyptian victory. And where's Lord Hyrokon? Well, there's some lions over here that are calmly standing in front of a person, has his arms out, and he has a club. And strangely, there look to be a few round lines and round symbols here. I don't know if this was destroyed and ruined, and this has something to do with a wheeled cart or something along that. I don't know. It's just a strange depiction here, but then the two here of the lions pretty much waiting at his beck and call. The Sumerian rampage continues. A huge Sumerian menacingly raises his war club. The circle on the left is a corral that was busted open and emptied of livestock. Ah, that might make sense, but it's shown in a microwave. The circle on the right is a ruined village hut reduced to its timbers. Beside it is a tiny forlorn Egyptian picks up the pieces. So that's supposed to be this. I could see that, I guess. We could also leave that totally out of the situation, but it fits. What's really interesting is what's happening with the two lions. Case and Payne and other scholars consider this to be a confrontation with those lions, and he raises up a couple of intriguing possibilities. The Sumerian is going to kill the lions. Normally in a fight between a man and a lion, I'll bet on the lion, even if the man has a stick. But look at the size of that man, look at the size of that stick. The Sumerian doesn't seem the least bit afraid of those lions. In fact, he seems to be reaching out to grab a lion by the throat before bashing its head with a club. This could symbolize the Sumerian's total mastery of the animal world. Not even the lions scare him, and that he could be the beginnings of the idea of that grabbing a lion up. And here we go with the idea. There's two lions, so perhaps the lions are going to kill that Sumerian. This could symbolize the turning tide of battle as the lions begin to attack the Sumerians. This would be the supreme irony. The master of the animals getting killed and eaten by his own two lions. You have to admit it's rather funny and morbid kind of way, but I suggest this scene is not a confrontation with the lions. The Sumerians and the lions have no intention of attacking each other. They are symbolic with each other at this point. The scene has a different, unexpected meaning. It is the simple, very mythological, something eerie and something supernatural. Something of the idea that they are the lion unleashed on the people. The Sumerian and the lions are not enemies, they are friends and allies, and you see this echoed again later in art, like I showed you with Ramses and so on. The raised clubs of the Sumerians has nothing to do with the lions. It refers to the destruction that he inflicts on the Egyptians by demolishing their homes and corrals. The Sumerian isn't grabbing a lion by the throat before clubbing it. He is summoning the lions with a wave of his hand. The lions are not a posture of attack. They are walking around. They follow the Sumerians around like pets. The lions are the animal familiars, if you will, of the Sumerians doing their bidding. And if you know about Dungeons and Dragons, you have a familiar and you can see through its eyes. If you've ever watched the ancient movie Beastmaster, he can see through the eyes of the tiger that he has, which has been painted black, but it's actually a tiger, and the weasels that he has, and of course the hawk or the falcon that he calls to, So the animals on the left is a female ibex, and then two in front of the Sumerian is a lion, and attacking the herd of ibexes. The Sumerian is not just shouting and waving his arms to scare off these ibexes, he's sicking his lions on them. Another lion is shown on the right tending a herd of antelopes. Like he's corralling them, like he's the proverbial dogs that corral animals. For the ancient Egyptians, the master of animals is not just a symbol of human dominance over the natural world. He is literally the controller of animals, directing their action. He casts a spell upon the lions, making them his minions, controlling them from afar. And so you can kind of see it more in this picture and how he's, sending them out in a fight. In the expanded view, we can see how the lions and the Sumerians work together to rustle the animals. Whichever direction the animals turn, they are confronted by either a lion or a Sumerian. The lion on the right is acting like a sheepdog, helping to herd the animals so they can be captured by the Sumerians. He drives the antelopes towards the Sumerian, while at the same time preventing the horses from escaping. The lead horse skids to a dead stop when he sees a lion. And so you can kind of see this depiction shown here. But if we look at that idea again too, there's a way of preying using other animals. You can have a falcon go attack for you and bring the food back, and then you give him a portion. To this day, there are fishing cormorants that the Asians use that they carry out on their boats, and they actually go fishing for fish and bring them back, and they make them back up the fish and stuff, and then they'll give them a couple, because they don't need to eat 35 fish. They only need a couple, and the village needs the 35 fish, or 32, and here's your 3. The horses are running away from the Sumerian, who has a lasso on the far right, and then you see the lion. It leads the horse, stops dead in his tracks, so these stop. But again, what we're looking at here, oddly, are horses, it seems, or, they could be donkeys, but it look like they're horses, and horses are not really known in Egypt at this time. That's one of the reasons that this has been kind of shelved off to the side, because that kind of ruins the belief of horses having been there. But there are no depictions of the horses being there or in the Levant or any of North Africa until the Hyksos come in from the far north east, and that's where horses come from. Even the Sumerians used donkeys at first. So, as at any livestock raid, the Sumerians captures any animals as they can, and then they run off the rest, so the other lion is helping to stampede the ibexes that haven't already been rustled by the Sumerians. It's easy to imagine that the astonished looks on the ibex faces when they first behold a man sicking a lion on them. The story of the master of the animals controlling the lion is truly extraordinary. It's original work of fiction that infuses a dark magic into the events of a local cattle raid, making it into a mythical battle of epic proportions. There's nothing else like it anywhere in the ancient world. Here we see the man with prisoners, and he's holding them, and he's grabbing that one by the head, and he's fixing to bop him on the head with a mace. This scene is labeled as threatening the prisoners, but it could be much worse than that, for this looks like the Horion smiting pose that you see quite often. The execution of the prisoners, 3 Sumerian prisoners, are kneeling on the ground, tied together with a long rope. The Egyptian guard grabs one of them by the hair before cracking his skull with a war club. The other 2 prisoners cower in fear while awaiting their weight of that mace. The scene is the beginning of the tradition showing the pharaoh holding his captured enemies by the hair and smiting their presence, sometimes shown like this in a captured motif where he holds back his standard. In the other motifs, he's definitely exactly in the pose of Orion, smiting, which you see here. And it's with that ceremonial mace, which we would call a scepter now, but now we can see that the scepter, having its globe top, had a reason for it, and the maces of old. So I suggest whenever a pharaoh is shown up here with it on his shoulder, that these are captured prisoners, and that whenever he shows them down here smiting them, that it's not just an idle threat, and that many of them were killed in a battle that he won in. The execution of prisoners after a battle may be offensive to the modern sensibilities, but it was common practice in the ancient world. The Egyptians had no qualms about it. For instance, the front of the Narmer palette shows the pharaoh executing a prisoner in the same manner, and the back of the palette shows the body of the bound prisoners with their severed heads lying between their feet. So some were symbolically killed, definitely. In the Heirokonopolis mural is the battle of execution. Sumerian prisoners, a sign that the Egyptian has finally won the battle? Well, no, not really. The next scene shows that the battle continues. There's a retreat type of look that's shown here, or people getting away, and these have hooks now, a little bit more on them. It's kind of strange. This scene is often described as combat between two men, but it seems to me that they're not facing each other. It looks like the Egyptian is running away from the Sumerian. Both men carry curved weapons. They have been described as shepherd crooks, which makes some sense to the context of a livestock raid, but I believe that they really are weapons, either adzes or battle axes. The blades of the weapons were made of copper or stone. There was no bronze at this age of history, but an adze is a construction tool that readily lends itself to warfare, and oftentimes, quite often, construction tools are adapted into warfare, and battle axes cut down trees, but they cut down people. And you get that same concept with it. In fact, the ancient Japanese had all their weapons taken away, but they had all of their farm implements, and all those farm implements were what they turned into hand-to-hand combat that we see today that came from them. Meanwhile, it's still a desperate struggle. The Egyptians are losing the battle. The Sumerian base camp that you find here, it looks like that they've taken over an area and had this base camp done. This kraal is captured intact with its livestock by the Sumerians. It's also where they herd their captured animals before loading them on the ships. At the bottom is a captured gazelle, tries to escape, trailing a rope behind him. So it looks like this one has already been roped, and he's got a rope trailing behind him. On the right, let's see, the white antelope is also trailing a rope. Okay, and then on the right, the Sumerian hog ties an antelope here, so he's tying up his legs, and see how his legs are tied in together? Right? So that's hog tying, just like a rodeo. An antelope trussing up his feet so he can't escape. The antelope is now ready to be loaded and transported on one of the ships. The only way to force a wild antelope to board a ship is to tie him up and carry him on. This isn't something that that may be a stab at Noah on the idea of trying to get these animals to walk up a plank into a ship. On the Gebel Arak knife, the master of animals is a Sumerian king. I don't believe this is the case on the Heirokonopolis mural, though. Neither do I believe that the master of animals is the Sumerian commander of the invasion. The commander is elsewhere, next to his black ship. On the Gebel Arak knife, the master of animals is just a figurehead. He's not involved in the battle. On the Heirokonopolis mural, he's part of the narrative. He is on the scene, actively involved in the conflict by controlling the animals. He's a shaman, priest god of the Sumerians. He's a supernatural being radiating his power across the landscape, causing fear and panic in the human and animal kingdoms of Egypt. The terrified animals scatter in all directions. He is the source of the Sumerians' supernatural power over the animals, the lions in particular. And of course, people think lions are only in Africa. Lions came up all the way through the whole area. The Golden Fleece area there has lions into them. The Sumerians have lions in their depiction. Where does this all come from? Well, they had lions from there, and all across North Africa, of course, in elder times, whenever the whole area wasn't a desert or a wasteland like it is now today. In the above picture, the Sumerian who is tying the antelope isn't the least bit concerned about the two enormous lions that are standing right behind him. So either the master of lions is the only one controlling the lions, or all the Sumerians have this supernatural power. In other words, the only one Sumerian controls the lions, or they all do. It is, of course, highly unlikely that every single Sumerian has this godlike power. It was supposed to have been shown symbolically. Besides, why else would the master of animals be on the field except to control the lions? He's not there just to strike a pose. He's there to cast his spell. This is the only plausible explanation for the symbiotic relationship between the Sumerians and the lions. The master of animals is supposed to be a positive image. It represents humanity's efforts to tame the wildness and the wilderness and bring forth civilization. But on the mural, the master of animals is portrayed as a sinister demon who uses his magical power over the animals for evil rather than good. There's also looting. This scene is often mistaken as combat between two men because it looks like a figure on the right is attacking a man holding a spotted shield on the left. That's not really what's going on there. It's unlikely they're fighting since they both have the same markings. And you can see the markings on the shirt of the guy on the right too. The red man on the left is obviously Sumerian. Surprisingly, so is the man in front of him. Look at those red legs. So he's red legs, but he's wearing an animal pelt. That's an animal. You get a pelt off of it. If it's spotted, it's a leopard, right? Sumerian on the left is holding an item of clothing, probably a leopard skin. It matches the spotted standard of the captive or the Egyptian lord. The Sumerians have plundered his wardrobe. The Sumerian on the right holds the lord's royal scepter in his hand. He dances around, parading his captured finery, mocking the lord, saying, "Look at me, I'm the great big Egyptian lord." So that's entirely possible that he has now worn the king's clothes and taken his stance. He tells him, "Bow down before me," and the Sumerian bow downs before him. His buddy comically obliges him. He bows down. Notice how his knees are bent and says, "Yes, Lord Almighty, I hear you and I obey you." He's cracking up, holding his belly with laughter. It's an unexpected bit of humor on an otherwise grim tablet. Well, it could be that, or it could be actually that he is now saying, "You are the Lord," and he does bend down in a solemn way. Killing. The Sumerian looters were a bit premature in their celebrations, though. The battle is not over yet, and the very next scene, a Sumerian bites the dust. Boom, and he's upside down here. The man on the right is the real Egyptian lord. Notice the white legs. He has just killed a Sumerian soldier, not the same one. So, scholars think that the soldier may be holding a pronged weapon, but it's actually a neck stock, the kind used in prisoners of war, and it even has a loop of rope around on it. The crook of the stock was placed on the back of the prisoner's neck. The rope went around his throat, and this way to control the prisoner while keeping him at a safe distance. And that's what this is probably here. It's a very important scene. The Egyptian is the captured lord himself, who escaped from his stock, seized the guard's weapon, and killed him with the guard's companions, while the guard's companions were busy plundering the wardrobe. This is the Lord's revenge. It would be reasonable for the viewer to assume that the Egyptian lord was somehow transferred to the Sumerian base camp after his capture, but I'm willing to bet that the artist did not carelessly leave this crucial detail to the viewer's imagination. Da-da! And then it goes here, to here, to here, to here. In true narrative fashion, to make the story more cohesive, the artist shows the captive lord being escorted to the Sumerian base camp. In other words, the artist moves the captive lord from the top of the painting after the event down here, and now he's there. In this way, it doesn't seem to make the Lord just magically appear in the story without an explanation or how he got there. You can see it from up here. There's an ostrich. The Sumerian in the middle is carrying a spotted garment with a tail on it. He is one of the looters, probably the one showing who is holding the garment but not wearing it. The figure on the right is the other looter. There's something going on with the spotting on both figures. There's plenty of room in the brown damaged area to hold two more figures, the guard and the captive lord, in a neck stock. I suggest that the scene originally showed the four figures shown below, the captive lord, his guard, and the two looters in transit to the Sumerian base camp at the bottom of the painting. With the heroic escape of the captive lord, the battle is finally beginning to turn in favor of the Egyptians. These people were already captured right up there by him. There are 3 Sumerians in skirts. There are 6 boats in the painting and 6 Sumerians in white skirts. I suggest that they are the captains of these ships. 3 of the captains were seen capturing the Egyptian lord. The other captains are here. They sit or kneel on the ground, oddly reposed amid the chaos. They still have their weapons, but they're strangely passive. Yeah, it looks like they have their weapons. Are they going to lay down their arms? Are they surrendering? I don't know. Remember, we're still looking for some clear sign of an Egyptian victory. Again, where's Lord Heirokonopolis? Shouldn't he be in the thick of the action, saving the day? Well, meanwhile, the 3 men just calmly sit there over here as they're watching all of this, looking to the right, staring off into the void. Well, this void that was right here, there could have been a lot of stuff in the middle of that painting. This is where we would expect to see Lord Heirokonopolis showing up. It's also where we expect to see the Sumerian commander next to his black ship. I suggest this is where the entire narrative came together. Unfortunately, the ending of the story is lost forever because of the damage to this painting. Then again, it's not too difficult to imagine how the story ended. At last, Lord Hyrikon arrives on the scene. He is larger than anyone else in the mural to show his great importance. There's no doubt about who is the grand poobah in this picture. In front of him is the Sumerian commander, himself a lord. Hyrikon either kills him or captures him or accepts his surrender. The victorious lord is flanked by his men. Captured Sumerians bow down in submission, and perhaps a lion kneels down before Lord Hyrikon or lies dead at his feet, signifying that Hyrikon is now the new master of animals. One more thing, I suggest that the captive lord is not other than Hyrikon himself. I know that I said he wouldn't portray his capture in his own burial tomb, but he would if he had heroically escaped from captivity and then turned the tables on his captors. His escape is the last scene before the surrender ceremony. It is the turning point of the battle. And the next scene, Lord Hyrikon is reunited with his men and he heads them off to victory. If the captive lord is someone else, it means he has taken up a lot of room in his narrative, and he is surrounded and captured, then he is escorted to a base camp, he is in his wardrobe and then plundered, then he frees himself from his neck stock and kills his captor, then he makes his heroic escape. And he has gotten all of the glory before Hyrikon even shows up. And that's probably not what this painting is all about. This is Hyrikon's burial chamber. This painting shows that he pressed himself to the gods for all eternity, that he is the hero in this story and not someone else. This is Lord Hyrikon, victorious in combat. He has been there all along. The master of beasts. For 100 years, scholars were unable to piece together the narrative events portrayed on Heirokonopolis' mural because they didn't know the exact context of the story or how it might fit together. It all comes down to the master of animals. If he weren't absent, the mural would be just seem what they say it looks like, a picture of Egyptian tribal warfare and some hunting. If the master of animals was present, but painted in different color than the red invaders, it would simply be a selection from the catalog of motifs, perhaps, that would be meaningless to the context of the picture. However, with the red Sumerian master of animals and the red invaders who arrived by boats, this painting can only be about a Sumerian seaborne invasion of Egypt, and it cannot be about anything else. On the Gebel Arak knife, the master of animals is glorified. On the mural, he is demonized, although the master of animals became a popular motif in many other ancient civilizations, and it never really caught on in Egypt much. You see sometimes they'll show lions back to back and things like that. So lions at their beckoning call and bay, but not as much as you see nearer its origins. At first, this is somewhat surprising, consider that the Egyptians' dedication to the control and domestication of wild animals were there, and the domesticating of beasts and so on. The master of animals is a god who was tailor-made for those Egyptians, but he never became part of the Egyptian pantheon, perhaps because he became a symbol of their foreign invasion. So on second thought, it's not only overly surprising that the master of animals was not too popular with the Egyptians, not after he sicked his lions on them. After a few Sumerian artifacts, including pictures of boats and the master of animals, had reached Egypt through intermediary traders via an overland route, it was the first time that the Egyptians heard about a distant and powerful kingdom called Sumer. Apparently, it caused a great consternation among the Egyptian nobility. It made them look up from their tribal wars long enough to realize that there was a big, bad, scary world out there, which could possibly be a threat to their own kingdoms. For the first time, Egyptians considered the possibility of a sea-borne invasion by foreigners, and it's really not that difficult. Whenever you find Bahrain and Dilmun are mentioned and stuff in the ancient deal, and all they have to do is come out the gate there and fish where they normally do. And they had trade here, and over in India. Yeah, the Maluha, and they know it, and it seems to have come from following the shore. So if they follow the shore that way, it becomes there. If they follow it this way, it leads up into the Red Sea and basically right into Egypt. But did this actually happen? Did the Sumerians invade Egypt? Well, he says he doubts it for reasons listed on the page about the Gebel knife. Sumer is simply too far away, almost 4,000 miles away. But if you've read stories about the Age of Discovery in 1500, 1700 AD, you know of the incredible hardships involved in long ocean voyages, even in modern sailing ships. It's doubtful that the Sumerians or their ships could survive such a long voyage, much less arrive with enough men to mount an invasion, much less survive the return trip. Plus, the Sumerians would have to row all the way there. Although the Sumerians later invented sailboats, there's no evidence of sails or that they had them on this time or these boats. And the boats were certainly not seagoing vessels that were large enough to carry troops. Besides, there weren't any sailing ships on either of the murals of the Gebel knives and stuff. And yet, there is still there. Yet the mural of Tomb 100 clearly shows a Sumerian seaborne attack on Heirokonopolis. So just for the sake of argument, let's look at these possibilities. One possible scenario can be seen on the map below. If the Sumerians wanted to attack Heirokonopolis from the western shore of the Red Sea, they would have to breach their boats on the coast, then travel 70 miles inland, then commander some Egyptian boats, then cross the Nile back to Heirokonopolis on the opposite side of the river. So he's saying come up the Red Sea here, and what you would have is that they would come in and go across, right? But Gebel Iraq is where this knife was here, so there's a cutting across it here. Heirokonopolis is found here. Here's where Thanis is in the ancient areas. Here's where the Badarian settlements are that are predating it too. You have the Nagamani oasis that runs right out through here. And so it seems like it's a lot more popular of an idea. The Sumerians wanted to attack Heirokonopolis from the western shore. They would have to breach their boats and come 70-mile inland. Well, I think we showed in the other video where if you look on those walls, they have the cave art showing you that they did drag those ships all the way there on skivs, that they didn't have wheeled carts pulling them there, that they did it on skivs. So perhaps the Sumerians didn't attack Egypt from the Red Sea, though. Perhaps they somehow commanded ships on the Mediterranean and attacked Egypt from the Nile River coming up. This requires a much shorter sea voyage, but as can be seen on the map, this scenario is even more unlikely than the first one, because you'd be traveling from here all the way up past all these places to fight people up here. So no, that's not it. The Horners came down. They came through in the Red Sea from there. That's definitely it. To attack Heirokonopolis, the Sumerians would have to travel the entire length of the Nile, past every major city, paddling upstream the entire time while being attacked by the Egyptians on both sides of the river. It's entirely possible that Lord Hyrcon could actually did fight a battle with events similar to the ones illustrated in the painting, including the escape, but he was mistaken if he thought that the battle was against the Sumerians. I personally would love it if the Sumerians were intrepid enough to mount a seaborne invasion of Egypt, such as an early stage of history. Not that I have anything against the Egyptians, but I don't see how it's even remotely possible, someone noted. This begs the question, why are the Sumerian seaborne invasions clearly depicted on both the Gebel Iraq knife and the Heirokonopolis mural if it didn't happen? How do they have cuneiform writing that matches up to the same, and the concept of an ideogram writing that works off phonetics if it doesn't connect to the ancient Phoenicians and the people that are there? I believe the importance of some Sumerian artifacts, along with the coincidental raids on the Egyptian coastline by nomadic tribesmen and the Egyptians thought were the Sumerians, galvanized the Egyptians into thinking about homeland defense. I suggest Lord Hyrcon and the other lords appointed themselves to be the defenders against a foreign invasion. They promised to put aside their differences and unite together with a common defense were they invaded by foreigners. I believe the perceived threat of the Sumerians helped to unite Egypt. For the first time in their history, Egyptian nobles began to think of Egypt as an entire country and not just a collection of warring tribes. The battle scenes on both the knife and the mural are hypothetical. They show what would happen if the Sumerians attacked Egypt. Well, I'm saying that it's probably a different thing, that it actually must have happened. And when it happened, it may have been a one-way trip. And we see there's the ancient rolling stones that they have, the cylinder seals that are the flat cylinders that are done, and that's shown in Egypt at the same time too, and a few other things that I show in my other 5-part video there, and along with this knife and a few other things, and it starts to be not only feasible, not only possible, not only plausible, but it looks extremely factual. So for the Egyptians, their worst of fears of a seaborne invasion eventually came true in 1200 BC when Egypt was overrun by the Sea Peoples. So it did happen, not too much later, after the end of the Sumerian civilization. For now, the Egyptian fear of a Sumerian invasion was something of a red scare, literally, but it helped to formulate the idea of a unified Egyptian nation. And I'm telling you, it started off the dynastic part of Upper Egypt, and then the secondary roll in was them capturing and unifying it all as one. 20 years after the tomb at Heirokonopolis was plundered, a private antiquities dealer offered to sell the Louvre Museum that flint knife with an elaborately carved handle. The provenance of the knife wasn't known, but it was alleged from Gebel Iraq, where they had been stealing things from up in there. So there aren't any major archaeological sites in Gebel Iraq, so the curates made an educated guess and assumed that the knife was probably from nearby Abydos, so an unknown provenance. When you're thinking what I'm thinking that it came from tomb robbers. Like a lot of the stuff, and a lot of the stuff that's lost forever. I showed a video recently where it shows that just in the process of a couple of years, one ancient area over in Iraq, Sumer, if you will, has just become looted and pitted. And it's not showing up in museums. In fact, it's not showing up for most anybody to ever even hear about or know. But yeah, lots of connections with that. Much connections. But hitting over 40 minutes again on this, and I said that I would go to that part 5, but what I'm going to do is link part 1 of the part 1 of 5 at the top right hand corner here at the end of this. Oh hell, if this is the end of me doing them, I'm going to put 1 on the top left. I believe where he really gets down to business on this is part 3 of 5. I won't put that one on the right hand side. We'll put something else for your enjoyment that'll show you another connection to this Proto Egyptian civilization. Like, share, and subscribe, guys, before you go, and lots more to come. Lots more to come. Peace.